Woman gives birth to her clone. How did this happen? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. Emma's heart raced as the ultrasound machine hummed quietly in the dimly lit room. The monitor flickered with a grainy image of her unborn child, a sight she had never dared to dream of. For years, doctors had told her that pregnancy was impossible due to a rare autoimmune condition. Yet here she was, 6 months along, with a baby growing steadily inside her. "This doesn't make sense," murmured Dr. Lopez, the obstetrician, breaking Emma's reverie. Her tone was careful, but Emma could sense the confusion beneath the professional veneer. "What do you mean?" Emma asked, her voice tight with worry. Dr. Lopez hesitated, her eyes fixed on the monitor. "Everything looks normal, but there are anomalies in the genetic markers we screened earlier. Nothing harmful," she added quickly, seeing Emma's panic, "but unusual enough that I've consulted with a few colleagues. They've never seen anything like it." Emma's stomach churned. "Unusual how?" Dr. Lopez offered a reassuring smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's too early to draw conclusions. Let's focus on the fact that the baby appears perfectly healthy." Emma nodded, but her mind was already spiraling. As she left the clinic, clutching a folder of medical records, she couldn't shake the feeling that something about her pregnancy wasn't normal. Deep down, a nagging voice whispered that this miracle wasn't as random as it seemed. Back home, Emma sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers and files from her old research projects. She had spent the last decade as a geneticist, working on groundbreaking but controversial studies in cellular regeneration and cloning. Her most ambitious project, a method to clone human cells with unprecedented precision, had been shut down 5 years ago amid an ethics scandal. Funding had dried up, and she'd been forced to pivot her career into less contentious fields. Yet, as she scanned the data from her pregnancy tests, Emma couldn't help but think back to that project. Could her work have inadvertently played a role in this? It sounded absurd even to her, but the timing felt too coincidental. She hadn't been in a relationship for years, nor had she undergone any fertility treatments. How, then, had she conceived? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was late, and Emma wasn't expecting visitors. She hesitated before opening it to find Dr. Hargrove, her former mentor and the lead scientist on the cloning project. His graying hair and sharp features were as familiar as ever, but his expression was grave. "Emma," he said, stepping inside uninvited. "We need to talk." Dr. Hargrove wasted no time. "I've been following your case," he began, gesturing to the medical folder on the table. "Lopez sent me the genetic profiles." Emma's stomach dropped. "She shared my records without asking me?" "She's concerned," Hargrove said, ignoring her indignation. "And rightly so. This pregnancy is extraordinary, Emma. The baby's DNA is a perfect match to yours." Emma stared at him, uncomprehending. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Hargrove continued, "that you're giving birth to your clone." The words hung in the air, impossible and yet irrefutable. Emma felt the room tilt as she tried to process what he was telling her. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Human cloning is illegal, not to mention the ethical implications?" Hargrove interrupted, his tone sharp. "Emma, we were on the cusp of this breakthrough 5 years ago. The technology was there, even if the funding wasn't. Someone clearly thought it was worth pursuing." "Someone?" Emma repeated, her voice rising. "You think this was intentional? That someone used me as a test subject?" "I don't know," Hargrove admitted, his gaze unwavering. "But what I do know is that this child, your child, represents the next chapter in genetic science. And the world isn't ready for it." Emma didn't sleep that night. She sat in the living room, staring at the ultrasound image of her baby, trying to reconcile the love she already felt for the child with the growing fear of what her birth would mean. If what Hargrove said was true, then Clara, she had already named her, was more than a miracle. She was a scientific anomaly, a living, breathing question mark. By morning, Emma had resolved to keep the truth hidden, at least until she could understand it herself. She told Dr. Lopez that she wanted to avoid further genetic testing, framing it as a desire for privacy. Lopez, sensing Emma's unease, didn't press the issue. But as the months passed, Emma couldn't escape the weight of what she knew. The baby kicked and rolled inside her, a constant reminder of the life she was bringing into the world, and the secrets she was keeping. The labor was both surreal and routine. Emma arrived at the hospital early in the morning, clutching her overnight bag and the same folder of medical records she'd carried everywhere since her first ultrasound. The nurses were kind and professional, guiding her through the contractions with calm efficiency. When Clara finally arrived, Emma felt an overwhelming rush of emotion. The baby was small but perfect, her tiny fingers grasping at the air as if searching for her mother. Emma held her close, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, nothing else mattered. Not the science, not the ethics, not the fear. All she could see was her daughter. "She's beautiful," one of the nurses said, her voice soft with awe. "A little miracle." Emma nodded, unable to speak. But as she looked down at Clara, she couldn't help but notice the striking resemblance. The baby's features, though still soft and undefined, were unmistakably hers. It was like looking into a mirror, one that reflected her own face from decades ago. The first few weeks at home were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings. Clara was a calm baby, rarely crying except when she was hungry or tired. Emma marveled at how easy it was to love her, despite the nagging questions that lingered in the back of her mind. But as Clara grew, those questions became harder to ignore. By the time she was 3 months old, her development was already ahead of schedule. She rolled over earlier than expected, held her head up with ease, and seemed to study Emma with an intensity that was almost unsettling. "She's just precocious," Emma told herself, brushing off her concerns. All babies develop at their own pace. But deep down, she knew there was more to it than that. Clara wasn't just precocious, she was exceptional. And Emma couldn't shake the feeling that her daughter's rapid growth was a sign of something far more complex. One evening, as Clara napped in her crib, Emma opened her laptop and began combing through the research archives she had sworn to leave behind. The data from her cloning project was still there, buried in encrypted files that only she and a handful of others had access to. As she read through the reports, a familiar mix of excitement and dread filled her chest. The technology had been groundbreaking, capable of replicating human DNA with astonishing accuracy. But the ethical concerns had always outweighed the potential benefits. Could it really be possible that someone had taken their work and used it to create Clara? And if so, why? Emma's thoughts were interrupted by a cry from the nursery. She rushed to Clara's side, scooping her up and holding her close. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, rocking her gently. "I've got you." As Clara settled against her chest, Emma made a silent vow. No matter what the future held, she would protect her daughter. Clara was more than a scientific marvel. She was her child. And nothing would change that. By the time Clara was 6 months old, Emma's suspicions were impossible to ignore. Clara wasn't just growing quickly, she was learning at an astonishing rate. She spoke her first word before her first birthday, not the usual baby babble but a clear, deliberate mama. By 18 months, Clara was stringing sentences together, her vocabulary expanding faster than Emma could keep up. At first, Emma tried to convince herself that Clara was simply gifted. But it was more than that. The way Clara moved, the way she solved problems, even her mannerisms, it was like watching a younger version of herself. The realization sent a chill down Emma's spine. Clara wasn't just her daughter, she was her. One afternoon, as Clara played with a set of blocks on the living room floor, Emma sat nearby, watching in silence. Clara's small hands moved with precision, stacking the blocks into a perfect pyramid. When the structure wobbled, she adjusted it with care, her expression calm and focused. "Clara," Emma said, her voice trembling. "How did you know how to do that?" Clara looked up, her bright blue eyes, Emma's eyes, gleaming with curiosity. "I just knew," she said simply, her tone matter-of-fact. Emma's chest tightened. She had built the same pyramid with the same method when she was a child, a memory she hadn't thought about in years. It wasn't just a coincidence. Clara was remembering things Emma had done, things she couldn't possibly have known. Desperate for answers, Emma turned to the only person she trusted, Dr. Hargrove. She invited him over one evening after Clara had gone to bed, her hands shaking as she poured them both cups of tea. Hargrove sat across from her at the kitchen table, his expression unreadable. "I don't know what to do," Emma admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Claire, she's not normal. She's not just smart, she's remembering things from my life. Things I haven't told her." Hargrove leaned back in his chair, his brows furrowed in thought. "It's possible," he said after a long pause. "Cloning isn't just about replicating DNA. The process we developed also had the potential to preserve cellular memory. It was a theory we never had the chance to test, but it's real," Emma finished for him, her heart sinking. "Clara is living proof." Hargrove nodded slowly. "I hate to say it, but yes. She's more than your clone, Emma. She's a continuation of you." Emma stared at him, her mind racing. A continuation. The word felt heavy, like a burden she hadn't asked for. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked. "How do I raise her, knowing what she is?" "You raise her the same way you would any child," Hargrove said, his tone firm. "She's still a person, Emma. She's still your daughter. The rest is just context." Emma tried to take Hargrove's advice, but the knowledge of Clara's origins weighed on her like a stone. Every milestone, every achievement felt like a reminder of what Clara represented. Not just a child, but a scientific anomaly, a living question mark. And then there was the fear. The fear that someone would find out the truth and take Clara away. Emma had already seen how the world reacted to things it didn't understand. Clara wasn't just different, she was unprecedented. Emma knew there were people who would see her as a threat, or worse, as an experiment. To protect Clara, Emma kept their lives as private as possible. She avoided playdates, declined invitations to social events, and kept Clara home from preschool. It wasn't easy. Clara was naturally curious and social, always asking why she couldn't go to the park or play with other kids. Emma tried to explain it as best she could, but Clara's questions only grew more pointed. "Is it because I'm not like them?" Clara asked one day, her small face serious. Emma froze, the words catching in her throat. "No, sweetheart," she said finally. "It's because I love you so much, and I want to keep you safe." Clara nodded, but the answer didn't seem to satisfy her. Emma could see the wheels turning in her daughter's mind, the same way they had turned in her own at that age. Clara was starting to piece things together, and Emma wasn't sure how much longer she could keep the truth from her. When Clara turned 5, everything changed. Emma had enrolled her in an online learning program, hoping it would satisfy her daughter's thirst for knowledge while keeping her out of the public eye. But Clara's abilities quickly outpaced the curriculum, and it wasn't long before the program administrators began asking questions. "We've never seen a student like Clara," one of the instructors said during a video call. "Her test scores are off the charts, and her grasp of complex concepts is, frankly, astonishing. Have you considered enrolling her in a gifted program?" Emma forced a smile, her palms sweating. "I'll think about it," she said, making a mental note to withdraw Clara from the program immediately. But it was too late. Word of Clara's brilliance had spread, and it wasn't long before reporters started showing up at their doorstep, asking questions Emma couldn't answer. She managed to fend them off for a while, but the pressure was relentless. The story of the mysterious child prodigy was too tantalizing to ignore. One evening, as Emma tucked Clara into bed, her daughter looked up at her with those piercing blue eyes. "Mama," she said, her voice soft. "Why are people so interested in me?" Emma's chest tightened. She had always known this moment would come, but she wasn't ready. "Because you're special, Clara," she said, her voice trembling. "You're smart and kind and amazing." Clara frowned, clearly unsatisfied with the answer. "Is it because I'm like you?" Emma froze, the air leaving her lungs. "What do you mean?" "I feel like I'm you," Clara said, her small hands clutching the blanket. "Sometimes I remember things I've never done, but they feel like my memories. And I look like you." "I know I do." Emma felt tears sting her eyes. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Clara's face. "You're my daughter," she said firmly. "That's all that matters." "But I'm more than that, aren't I?" Clara pressed, her voice unwavering. "I'm your clone." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Hearing Clara say the word out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. She wanted to deny it, to shield Clara from the truth, but she couldn't lie to her daughter. Not anymore. Yes, Emma said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. You're my clone. But you're also so much more than that. You're your own person, Clara. You're not just a copy, you're you. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, her expression determined. I'm glad, she said, because I want to be me. The conversation marked a turning point for both of them. For the first time, Clara understood who she was, and Emma began to see her daughter not as a reflection of herself but as her own unique person. It wasn't easy, there were still questions and fears and challenges to navigate, but it was a start. Emma decided it was time to stop hiding. Clara deserved to live a full life, and Emma was determined to give it to her no matter what the risks. She reached out to Dr. Hargrove for help, and together they devised a plan to share Clara's story with the world on their terms. It's better if we control the narrative, Hargrove said during one of their meetings. If people hear the truth from you, they'll be less likely to jump to conclusions. Emma nodded, though the thought of going public filled her with dread. She wasn't sure how the world would react to Clara, but she knew she couldn't keep her daughter hidden forever. Clara deserved to be seen, not as an anomaly, but as a person. And so, with Clara by her side, Emma prepared to take the biggest risk of her life. Emma sat at her desk late into the night, staring at the draft of her statement. The words felt heavy, as if they carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. She had spent weeks crafting the narrative she wanted to share, balancing the truth with the need to protect Clara. Still, no matter how she framed it, she knew the world's reaction was beyond her control. Across the room, Clara sat on the couch, her legs swinging as she flipped through a picture book. At 7 years old, Clara carried herself with a confidence that often made her seem older than her years. Her curiosity was insatiable, her mind always racing with questions and ideas. Emma couldn't help but smile, watching her daughter hum softly as she turned the pages. Are you nervous? Clara asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Emma looked up, startled. Nervous about what? About telling people about me, Clara said, her tone matter of fact. You've been working on that statement for a long time. Emma hesitated before nodding. A little, she admitted, but I'm more worried about how they'll treat you. People don't always understand things that are different. Clara closed her book and walked over to Emma, her small hand resting on her mother's arm. I'm not scared, she said, her voice steady. You always tell me I'm strong. And I know you'll protect me. Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. You're stronger than I'll ever be, she said, pulling Clara into a hug. And no matter what happens, we'll face it together. The announcement came in the form of an interview. Emma had reached out to a trusted journalist, someone who had a reputation for fairness and sensitivity. The interview took place in their home, with Emma and Clara sitting side by side on the couch. Cameras captured every detail, the way Clara's hand rested on her mother's knee, the nervous but determined look in Emma's eyes. The journalist began with gentle questions, asking about Emma's background and her work in genetics. Emma answered carefully, laying the groundwork for the revelation to come. And Clara, the journalist asked, turning her attention to the little girl. She's a remarkable child. Can you tell us more about her? Emma took a deep breath. Clara is extraordinary, she said, her voice steady. Not just because of her intelligence or her talents, but because of who she is. Claire is my clone. The room fell silent, the weight of Emma's words hanging in the air. Clara looked up at her mother, her expression calm but curious, as if she were watching a scene unfold in a storybook. The journalist's eyebrows lifted, but she remained composed. Your clone, she repeated. Yes, Emma said, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Clara was born through a process that replicated my DNA. She's not just my daughter, she's genetically identical to me. The journalist paused, giving Emma's words space to sink in. Why share this now? She asked. Because Clara deserves to live without fear, Emma said, her voice breaking slightly. She's not a science experiment. She's not a mistake. She's my child, and she has every right to be seen as a person, not a curiosity. The interview ended with Clara speaking for herself, her clear, confident voice capturing the hearts of everyone watching. I know I'm different, she said, her hands folded neatly in her lap. But being different doesn't mean I'm not real. I'm just me. The reaction was immediate and intense. Within hours, the interview was trending across social media, with hashtags like #ClaraTheClone and #HumanMiracle dominating the conversation. News outlets picked up the story, running headlines that ranged from sensational to supportive. Scientists weighed in with varying opinions, some hailing Clara as a breakthrough and others raising ethical concerns. Emma braced herself for the backlash, but to her surprise, much of the public response was overwhelmingly positive. Clara's bravery and eloquence had struck a chord, and many people saw her as a symbol of resilience and hope. Still, not everyone was supportive. Protesters gathered outside their home, holding signs that read "Playing God has consequences" and "Cloning is an abomination." Emma received threatening emails and phone calls, accusing her of violating the natural order. It was a stark reminder of the challenges they still faced. "Are they mad at me?" Clara asked one morning, peering out the window at the small crowd of protesters. "No, sweetheart," Emma said, kneeling beside her. "They're scared. People get scared of things they don't understand. But that doesn't mean they're right." Clara nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe we can help them understand." Emma and Clara's story sparked a global conversation about cloning and its implications. Scientists, ethicists, and policymakers debated the issue on television and in academic journals, while everyday people shared their thoughts online. Some saw Clara as a marvel of modern science, a glimpse into the future of medicine and genetics. Others feared what her existence represented, warning of a slippery slope toward a world where human lives could be engineered and commodified. Through it all, Emma focused on protecting Clara's humanity. She declined invitations to scientific conferences, wary of turning her daughter into a spectacle. Instead, she worked with advocacy groups to promote ethical guidelines for cloning research and to educate the public about Clara's story. "We're not here to debate the science," Emma said during a panel discussion. "We're here to remind people that Clara is a person. She has thoughts, feelings, dreams, just like anyone else. That's what matters most." Clara, now 8, began to play a more active role in the conversation. She spoke at schools and community events, sharing her experiences and answering questions with a maturity that often left audiences stunned. "What's it like to be a clone?" one child asked during a school assembly. Clara smiled. "It's like being me," she said simply. "I might have started out like my mom, but I'm growing into my own person. And I think that's pretty cool." Over time, the controversy surrounding Clara began to fade, replaced by a deeper understanding of what she represented. She became a symbol of possibility, a reminder that science, when guided by compassion, could create something extraordinary. For Emma, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. She and Clara moved to a quieter neighborhood, away from the prying eyes of the media. Clara attended school in person for the first time, making friends and thriving in an environment that celebrated her uniqueness. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Clara turned to Emma with a question that had been on her mind for a while. "Do you think there will be more people like me someday?" she asked. Emma considered the question carefully. "Maybe," she said. "But if there are, I hope they'll have someone to love them as much as I love you." Clara smiled, leaning her head against her mother's shoulder. "I hope so too." As the years passed, Clara's life began to take on a rhythm that felt normal, or as close to normal as it could be. By the time she turned 10, the media frenzy surrounding her had largely subsided, replaced by a quieter curiosity. Most people had moved on to other stories, and Clara was grateful for the chance to just be a kid. But just a kid didn't quite describe Clara. Her intelligence and emotional maturity often set her apart, even from her peers in advanced classes. Teachers marveled at her ability to grasp complex concepts, while classmates sought her out for help with their schoolwork. Clara was kind and approachable, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was different in ways most people couldn't understand. One afternoon, during a science fair at school, Clara unveiled her latest project, a model demonstrating cellular regeneration. The project was leagues ahead of what most 10-year-olds could even comprehend, let alone create. Parents and teachers flocked to her table, their expressions a mix of awe and disbelief. "This is incredible," one teacher said, examining the detailed diagrams Clara had drawn. "How did you come up with this?" Clara hesitated, glancing at Emma, who stood nearby. "I just thought about how cells work," she said carefully. "And I wanted to see if I could make something that explained it." The teacher nodded, clearly impressed. "Well, you've certainly done that. You might just be the next big name in science." Clara smiled politely, but the words made her stomach twist. She didn't want to be the next big name. She just wanted to be Clara. That evening, as they walked home from the fair, Clara was unusually quiet. Emma noticed the change in her daughter's mood and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" she asked. Clara shrugged. "I don't know. It's just, sometimes I feel like people don't see me. They only see what I can do." Emma's heart ached at the words. She had always known that Clara's extraordinary abilities would set her apart, but hearing her daughter voice that loneliness was almost too much to bear. "You're more than what you can do," Emma said gently. "You're smart and kind and funny. People might notice your talents first, but the ones who really care about you will see all the other things that make you special." Clara nodded, but the sadness in her eyes lingered. "I just wish I could be normal," she said softly. Emma knelt down, looking Clara in the eye. "Normal is overrated," she said with a smile. "You're not normal, Clara. You're extraordinary. And that's not a bad thing. It's a gift." Clara smiled faintly, but the weight of her thoughts didn't lift. Emma knew it would take time for her daughter to fully embrace who she was, and she vowed to be there every step of the way. As Clara grew older, her questions about her origins became more frequent and more pointed. She had always known she was a clone, but the full implications of that fact didn't hit her until she entered her teenage years. She wanted to understand why she had been created, what her existence meant, and whether she would ever truly fit in. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table after dinner, Clara turned to Emma with a serious expression. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Emma said, setting down her mug of tea. "Why did you let them do it?" Clara asked. "Why did you let them make me?" Emma froze, the question cutting deeper than she had expected. She had always known this conversation would come, but that didn't make it any easier. "It wasn't planned," Emma said carefully. "I didn't know what was happening until after you were already on the way. But when I found out, I knew one thing for sure. I wanted you. No matter how you came to be, you're my daughter, and I love you more than anything." Clara studied her mother's face, her expression unreadable. "But if I'm a clone, does that mean I'm not real?" Emma's chest tightened. "Of course you're real," she said firmly. "You're as real as anyone else. You think, you feel, you dream. That's what makes you real. Being a clone doesn't change that." Clara nodded slowly, but Emma could see the doubt lingering in her eyes. It was a question that would take more than words to answer, and Emma knew she couldn't shield Clara from the complexities of her identity forever. In the years that followed, Clara began to carve out her own path, determined to define herself on her own terms. She threw herself into her studies, excelling in subjects ranging from biology to philosophy. She joined the debate team, where her sharp intellect and quick wit made her a formidable opponent. And she made friends who valued her for who she was, not just for what she could do. But no matter how much Clara achieved, the question of her origins continued to weigh on her. She couldn't escape the feeling that she was living in her mother's shadow, a reflection of someone else's life rather than her own. The more she learned about cloning and genetics, the more she wondered about the ethical implications of her existence. Was she an accident? A miracle? Or something in between? One night, as she and Emma sat on the porch, watching the stars, Clara voiced the question that had been haunting her for years. "Do you think I was meant to exist?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma turned to her, her eyes filled with love and sadness. "I don't know if anyone is ever really meant to exist," she said. "But I do know this: you're here, and you're incredible. You've brought so much joy and love into my life, Clara. And no matter what anyone says, you belong in this world." Clara leaned against her mother, her heart heavy but comforted by Emma's words. She didn't have all the answers, but she was beginning to realize that maybe she didn't need them. Maybe it was enough to simply live and make the most of the life she had been given. As Clara entered adulthood, she continued to grapple with questions of identity and purpose. She pursued a degree in bioethics, driven by a desire to understand the complexities of science and humanity. Her story, once a source of controversy, had become an inspiration to many, sparking conversations about what it meant to be human. But for Clara, the most important lessons weren't found in textbooks or debates. They were found in the quiet moments she shared with Emma, in the love and support that had carried them through the challenges they had faced together. One evening, as they sat together looking through old photo albums, Clara smiled at a picture of herself as a baby, cradled in Emma's arms. "You look so happy," Clara said, tracing the edges of the photo with her finger. "I was," Emma said, her voice warm. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me." Clara looked up at her mother, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Emma asked. "For loving me," Clara said. "For always believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Emma pulled her daughter into a hug, tears streaming down her face. "You're my miracle, Clara," she said. "And I'll always be proud of you." By the time Clara reached her mid-20s, she had become a prominent voice in the field of bioethics. Her unique perspective, shaped by her extraordinary origins, allowed her to navigate the complexities of science and morality with an insight that few others could match. She published articles, gave lectures, and participated in panel discussions, always advocating for a balance between scientific advancement and ethical responsibility. But despite her growing reputation, Clara remained deeply grounded. She had seen firsthand the consequences of unchecked ambition, not just in science but in society as a whole. She often spoke about the importance of compassion and humility, reminding others that progress was only meaningful if it served humanity as a whole. One evening, Clara was invited to deliver a keynote speech at an international conference on genetics and ethics. The room was packed with scientists, policymakers, and journalists, all eager to hear from the woman who had become a symbol of both controversy and hope. Clara stood at the podium, her presence commanding but approachable. She began by sharing her story, not as a spectacle but as a way to illustrate the human side of the scientific debates that often felt abstract and detached. "I was born through a process that many consider controversial," she said, her voice steady. "But for me, it's not just a debate, it's my life. I've spent years trying to understand what it means to be me, to exist in a way that challenges the boundaries of what we think is possible." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "What I've learned is that being different doesn't make you less human. It doesn't make you less deserving of love, respect, or dignity. And it doesn't mean you don't belong." The audience was silent, captivated by her sincerity. Clara went on to discuss the need for ethical frameworks that prioritized humanity over profit, cautioning against the dangers of viewing scientific advancements as commodities rather than tools for the greater good. "When we lose sight of the people behind the science," she said, "we lose sight of what makes us human. It's not enough to ask if we can do something. We have to ask if we should, and if we're prepared to face the consequences." Her speech ended with a standing ovation, the applause echoing through the conference hall. Clara felt a mix of pride and relief as she stepped off the stage, knowing she had made an impact. But as she mingled with attendees afterward, she couldn't shake the feeling that her journey was far from over. Back home, Emma watched the live stream of Clara's speech with tears in her eyes. She had always known her daughter was special, but seeing Clara use her voice to inspire and educate others filled her with a pride she could hardly put into words. When Clara returned from the conference, Emma greeted her with a warm hug. "You were incredible," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Mom," Clara said, smiling. "I couldn't have done it without you." Emma shook her head. "You've become so much more than I ever imagined. You've made your own way, Clara. I just gave you the start." Clara nodded, her heart full. But it was the best start anyone could have asked for. Despite her accomplishments, Clara still faced moments of doubt. The weight of being a symbol, a living representation of the possibilities and pitfalls of science, sometimes felt overwhelming. She often wondered if she was doing enough, if her efforts to bridge the gap between science and ethics were truly making a difference. One evening, as she and Emma sat on the porch watching the sunset, Clara voiced her fears. "Do you think people will ever really accept me?" she asked, her voice quiet. Emma reached over, placing a hand on her daughter's. "I think most people already do," she said. "And the ones who don't? They're missing out on knowing someone amazing." Clara smiled faintly, but the doubt lingered. "It's hard sometimes," she admitted, "feeling like I have to prove that I belong." Emma's heart ached at her daughter's words. "You don't have to prove anything, Clara," she said firmly. "You belong because you're here, because you exist. And anyone who can't see that doesn't matter." Clara leaned into her mother's embrace, finding comfort in her words. "Thanks, Mom," she said softly. "I needed to hear that." As the years went on, Clara continued to make her mark on the world. She founded an organization dedicated to promoting ethical practices in genetics, working with scientists and policymakers to ensure that advancements in the field were guided by compassion and responsibility. She also became a mentor to young people, sharing her experiences and encouraging them to embrace their own unique paths. Through it all, Emma remained her constant support. She attended Clara's lectures, proofread her articles, and offered a listening ear whenever Clara needed to talk. Their bond, forged through years of love and resilience, remained unbreakable. One day, as they walked through a park near their home, Clara turned to Emma with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if things had been different?" she asked. Emma considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I wouldn't trade this life for anything. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara." Clara smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me too," she said. The legacy of Emma and Clara's journey extended far beyond their own lives. Their story inspired a generation to rethink what it meant to be human, to embrace the possibilities of science while remaining grounded in compassion and ethics. Clara's work reshaped the field of genetics, proving that progress and humanity could coexist. And though their path had been filled with challenges, Emma and Clara faced each one together, their bond a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the courage to be different. As they sat on the porch one evening, watching the stars, Clara reached for her mother's hand. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" Emma asked, her voice filled with warmth. "For everything," Clara said. "For giving me life, for believing in me, and for showing me how to be brave." Emma smiled, her eyes shining with tears. "You've always been brave, Clara. I just helped you see it." And as the stars twinkled above them, mother and daughter sat in the quiet comfort of each other's presence, knowing that their journey was far from over, but that they would face whatever came next together. As Clara's work gained international recognition, the ripple effects of her existence began to reshape not just scientific discussions but societal perceptions of identity, individuality, and ethics. The organization she founded, Human First, became a leading voice in advocating for humane and ethical approaches to advancements in cloning and genetic research. Yet even with her growing influence, Clara remained grounded, driven not by ambition but by a desire to use her story for good. Emma, now in her late 50s, watched Clara's life unfold with a quiet pride that never faded. Their relationship had evolved over the years. While Emma had started as Clara's protector and guide, Clara had grown into a strong, independent woman capable of leading in ways that often left Emma in awe. One afternoon, as they sorted through a box of old keepsakes, Clara came across a photograph from Emma's early years as a geneticist. The photo showed Emma in a lab coat, standing beside Dr. Hargrove, her face alight with ambition and hope. "You look so young," Clara said, holding the photo up to the light. "What were you thinking about back then?" Emma laughed softly. "I was probably thinking about how to change the world," she said. "Back then, I thought science was the key to everything. I wanted to solve every problem, fix every flaw." Clara studied the photo for a moment longer before setting it aside. "Do you think you did?" she asked. "Change the world, I mean." Emma looked at her daughter, her heart full. "I think we both did," she said. "And I think we're still doing it." Despite her achievements, Clara still faced moments of doubt and introspection. The weight of being the first human clone, of being a symbol for both progress and controversy, wasn't something that ever fully disappeared. She often wondered what her life might have been like if she had been born under different circumstances, free from the scrutiny and expectations that came with her existence. But for every moment of doubt, there were countless moments of joy and connection that reminded Clara of the beauty in her life. She found solace in her work, fulfillment in her friendships, and endless love in her relationship with Emma. And as she grew older, she began to understand that her life wasn't defined by the circumstances of her birth but by the choices she made and the impact she had on others. One day, Clara was invited to speak at a United Nations summit on the ethics of emerging technologies. The event was one of the most high-profile appearances of her career, and the room was filled with world leaders, scientists, and activists. As Clara took the stage, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves in her chest, but she steadied herself, drawing strength from the years of experience and the unwavering support of her mother. "My name is Clara," she began, her voice clear and steady. "And I am a clone. But I am also a person, a daughter, a friend, and an advocate. My existence may have begun as an experiment, but my life is my own. And I stand before you today not as a symbol of science, but as a reminder of what we can achieve when we choose to embrace the unknown with compassion and courage." The room was silent, every eye fixed on Clara as she spoke about the importance of ethical frameworks, the need for accountability, and the power of human connection. She shared stories from her own life, moments of joy and struggle that highlighted the humanity behind the science. "We have the power to shape the future," Clara said, her voice filled with conviction. "But with that power comes responsibility. It's not enough to ask what we can do. We must also ask what we should do, and who we are doing it for." Her speech ended with a standing ovation, the applause echoing through the hall. As Clara stepped off the stage, she spotted Emma in the audience, her eyes shining with tears. The two women exchanged a look of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. In the years that followed, Clara continued to build on her work, but she also began to focus on her personal life. She found love in an unexpected place, falling for a fellow advocate who shared her passion for ethics and justice. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and a deep understanding of the complexities of each other's lives. Emma, now retired, found joy in watching her daughter thrive. She spent her days gardening, volunteering, and reflecting on the incredible life she had built with Clara. Their bond remained as strong as ever, a testament to the love and resilience that had carried them through every challenge. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Emma turned to Clara with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about what the future holds?" she asked. Clara smiled, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "All the time," she said. "But I don't worry about it as much as I used to. I think we've done a pretty good job of showing the world what's possible." Emma nodded, her heart full. "You've done more than that, Clara. You've shown the world what it means to be human." Clara leaned her head against her mother's shoulder, the weight of the years falling away in that quiet moment of connection. "I learned from the best," she said softly. As the stars twinkled above them, mother and daughter sat in comfortable silence, their hearts filled with gratitude for the journey they had shared. The road ahead was uncertain, as it always had been, but they faced it with the same courage and love that had carried them through every challenge. Because at the end of the day, their story wasn't just about science or ethics or controversy. It was about the unbreakable bond between a mother and her daughter, and the power of love to transform even the most extraordinary circumstances into something beautiful.